There is no doubt that the devotion to divine mercy is one of the most popular and increasingly popular devotions in the church today. And it's pretty amazing to think that it is less than 25 years old as we know it today. And so in this video, I'm going to talk about the devotion to divine mercy as we know from images like this and St. Faustina and John Paul II, and also kind of compare and contrast to the traditional teachings of the church as seen through St. Thomas Aquinas. And so when I pop this image up on the screen, if you are a Catholic and you've been alive for the last 20 years or so, you have seen this. There are various versions of it. This is what you might call the original Divine Mercy image, but the rays coming out from Jesus, of white and red coming from his heart. And of course, you probably know much of the story. I'm not going to go into a lot of it, but it does involve the visit and the private revelation that he gave to Saint Faustina Kowalska back in the 1930s. Okay, and this is something that the church has now approved, and so I'm going to speak of it as a reality. I know some people are not really big on this devotion, but I'm going to follow the church and say that this is something that I think is legit, you could say. But I also want to compare it to the teachings of St. Thomas Aquinas, and you'll see kind of how this video unfolds in what Aquinas said in comparison to what is being taught today through the Divine Mercy devotion. Okay, so St. Faustina lived only 33 years, and she was born in Poland. The image that she was asked to draw actually happened in Lithuania. It's an interesting story, and again, I'm not going to get into too many of the details, but this is a very rich and very recent aspect of church history, and it also is very much intertwined with the papacy of Pope John Paul II, who of course was Polish himself, and in fact he canonized St. Faustina in April of 2000 as the first saint to be canonized in the new millennium. And this was not just a coincidence, because he felt very strongly that this devotion of divine mercy needed to be spread in the church in the 20th and 21st century in particular. Okay, so what we're going to do is, first of all, briefly, I'm going to give you a few of the excerpts from the diary of St. Faustina and kind of give you a flavor in case you're not real familiar with Divine Mercy and the devotion to it. And of course, there's the chaplet and there's the image, as I mentioned a moment ago. There's a lot of different aspects of this. The second Sunday of Easter is now, actually the day that I'm recording this is Divine Mercy Sunday, and that's why it's on my mind, because it's everywhere in the church, and it's a very, very popular devotion, as I mentioned. So, and again, St. Thomas Aquinas did not have knowledge, obviously, of the visits of Jesus to St. Faustina, so he would not have had this, this devotion back in the 13th century, but he certainly did write about divine mercy, as I will show in two articles in this video. Interestingly, though, in the Tertia Pars of the Summa, the third part of the Summa, when he talks about the incarnation, he really details a lot of different aspects of Jesus's life and different aspects of Jesus's ministry and his miracles and transfiguration and of course the very hypostatic union that was who Jesus was. But he never talks about mercy in Jesus. And again, I'm not trying to draw any conclusions from this. It's not something specifically that St. Thomas Aquinas honed in on, but he did write about divine mercy itself. And that's what we're going to be kind of analyzing during this video. All right, so these are some excerpts from the diary of St. Faustina. This is to give you a little bit of a flavor of what Jesus revealed to St. Faustina in the private revelations back in the 1930s. Okay, let all mankind recognize my unfathomable mercy. It is a sign for the end times. After it will come the day of justice. Okay, so there seems to be an element here that the mercy will precede justice. Okay, and that's going to be important when we talk about St. Thomas Aquinas here in just a moment. All right, he who refuses to pass through the door of my mercy must pass through the door of my justice. Okay, that almost sounds like a threat, right? And so that's also going to play out in St. Thomas Aquinas as well. My heart overflows with great mercy for souls, and especially for poor sinners. All right, so there seems to be in the devotion to divine mercy almost an emphasis on sinners, and the greater the sinner, the greater the emphasis. Okay, this is a very, very big part of divine mercy. The greater, well, here we go. The greater the sinner, the greater the right. The greater the right he has to my mercy. My mercy is confirmed in every work of my hands. He who trusts in my mercy will not perish, for all his affairs are mine, and his enemies will be shattered at the base of my footstool. Okay? And then finally, tell all people, my daughter, St. Faustina, that I am love and mercy itself. Okay, this is going to come back in Aquinas. When a soul approaches me with trust, I fill it with such an abundance of graces that it cannot contain them within itself, but radiates them to other souls. This issue of trust is very big in the modern day divine mercy devotion. Okay, that my Jesus, I trust in you. Okay, that's the sentence that we always see on the divine mercy image. Okay, do we trust in Jesus? Okay, that's not specifically going to come out in St. Thomas Aquinas's, but it probably is implied in what Aquinas has to say. So let me just start off with an interesting tidbit of information that, the Summa is big, and it has four main parts: prima pars, prima secunda, secunda secundae, and then tertia pars. And then after Thomas stopped writing and he dies, his scribe Reginald finished the Summa, and that's called the supplement, right? And then there are a few appendices at the end, mostly about purgatory. Okay, but the supplement is pretty long. Question 99 is, for all intents and purposes, the last question of the Summa. Okay, like the very, very end. Okay, there's like 3,000, 620 questions in the Summa. There's a lot. This is the last one, and it has to do with mercy and justice. Okay, specifically mercy and justice toward the damned. Okay, these are the people in hell. And it's very interesting what Aquinas says here. Okay, so I'm going to go through these real quickly. And he says in Article 1, whether by divine justice an eternal punishment is inflicted on sinners. So basically the question is, do people in hell really get eternal punishment? Is it going to be everlasting? And Thomas, without any equivocation, says yes. And then in Article 2, whether by God's mercy all punishment of the damned, both men and demons, comes to an end. And then now he's saying, even the human beings, okay, is there not some more mercy on human beings as opposed to demons? And Thomas says, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you're a human being or a demon. If you're in hell, it's going to be forever, okay? Article 3, whether God's mercy suffers at least men to be punished eternally, okay? And so the first one was about, is it just the angels? Okay, now he's saying, is it men? Is it humans? And yes, the answer is yes. Okay, Article 4, whether the punishment of Christians is brought to an end by the mercy of God. So now he's saying, if men or human beings are in hell and they're going to be punished eternally, what about if they're Christians? Will they at some point not have to suffer eternally? And Thomas says, no, if it doesn't matter if they're a Christian, if they're in hell, if they didn't die in a state of mortal sin, they are going to be suffering eternally, okay? And this is on the section on mercy and justice. And then finally, this is the one I find the most interesting, he says, whether all those who perform works of mercy will be punished eternally. So now he's saying, well, what if they're really merciful people and they did acts of mercy and they're Christians, but they still died in a state of mortal sin? At some point, will their suffering end? And Thomas doubles down and says, no, it doesn't matter, because if they objectively die in a state of mortal sin, they are going to be in hell forever. All right, so this, you would say, wow, Thomas doesn't believe in this whole mercy, but you have to make a distinction, because the devotion to divine mercy is for the living. It's not for the dead. It's not for the people who have already received their judgment. This is the modern day devotion of divine mercy is for us as living human beings who have not yet been judged, received our particular or our general judgment. All right, so I'm going to share 2 articles with you here about St. Thomas Aquinas and divine judgment. This one comes early in the Summa. It's like in the first 25 questions in the Summa when Thomas is talking about God. God is simple, and he's good, and he's perfect, and he's infinite, and he's eternal, and he's one. And then Thomas asks the question a little bit further on, maybe question 25 or so, whether mercy can be attributed to God. It's very interesting what he says. First of all, he quotes Psalm 110, "He is a merciful and gracious Lord." Okay, so Thomas is never going to refute Scripture. So if Scripture says that God is merciful, well, God is merciful. Okay, and that's the end of the story. Then he goes on, mercy is especially to be attributed to God as seen in its effect, but not as an affection of passion, in proof of which it must be considered that a person is said to be merciful as being, so to speak, sorrowful at heart, being affected with sorrow at the misery of another as though it were his own. Okay, this is compassion, as if it was his own, right? Hence it follows that he endeavors to dispel the misery of this other as it were his, and this is the effect of mercy. Okay, remember, the effect is God, but not the affectation, which means here that Thomas is trying to hold on to the fact that God is immutable. God doesn't have passions. Jesus did, but we're talking about God as in the Blessed Trinity here, right? And God is immutable. And so he's not, it's like, oh gosh, I'm so sorry about that poor sinner. It just breaks my heart. And Thomas is saying, no, that doesn't happen. But the effect of his mercy is that he wants to dispel misery. All right, so keep that in mind. So this seems pretty compatible with the modern day notion of divine mercy. Okay, to sorrow therefore over the misery of others belongs not to God. Okay, not the passion, but it does most properly belong to him to dispel that misery. Whatever be the defect, we call by that name. One thing you're going to find in these articles is that he never uses the word sin. He says defect, but he doesn't talk about poor sinners. He doesn't talk about anything like that, which I found very interesting, right? Now, defects are not removed except by the perfection of some kind of goodness, and the primary source of goodness is God. Okay, so if the effect is to remove misery, and it takes goodness to take away the misery, God is good. God is going to desire to take away man's misery as best he can. All right, it must, however, be considered that to bestow perfections appertains not only to the divine goodness, but also to his justice, liberality, and mercy, yet under different aspects. The communicating of perfections, absolutely considered, appertains to goodness. Insofar as perfections are given to things in proportion, the bestowal of them belongs to justice. Insofar as God does not bestow them for his own use, but only on account of his goodness, it belongs to liberality. Insofar as perfections given to things by God expel defects, it belongs to mercy. So this is one thing that I think a lot of people don't understand about St. Thomas Aquinas' explanation of God, is that God is simple in the fact that his justice and his mercy and his liberality and his goodness, those are only distinctions that we make about God, okay, for us to help understand, okay, but they're not different. They're not separate. God is who he is, and he is justice. He is mercy. He is goodness. He is liberality, okay? So it's just who he is, and he pours out all of these upon humanity all at the same time, and you could even say they're the same thing in God because God is. Okay, that's the name that he revealed to Moses on the mountain, okay? So the next article and the last article that I'm going to share with you is whether in every work of God there are mercy and justice, okay? And again, I think if there's one criticism I have, and it's not really even a criticism, it's more of an observation, I think sometimes in modern day people will kind of isolate God's mercy, okay, God's mercy on poor sinners, okay, and he pours out that mercy, which he does. but it's never separate from justice. It's never separate from goodness. It's never separated from liberality, because it's all the same, right? So I think what Thomas does is he has kind of a big picture view of all of this. And okay, let me get to this. Okay, whether in every work of God there are mercy and justice. It is said, all the ways of the Lord are mercy and truth. Okay, mercy and truth are necessarily found in all of God's works, if mercy be taken to mean the removal of any kind of defect. Whatever is done by him in created things is done according to proper order and proportion, wherein consists the idea of justice. Okay, so he's kind of honing in on justice now. Thus, justice must exist in all of God's works. But listen to this next thing that he says. This is one of the interesting takeaways from this, and where I think it's similar and congruent with the modern day devotion to divine mercy. The work of divine justice always presupposes the work of mercy. Okay, so now there seems to be a little bit of a hierarchical type of thing here, where the mercy does come first, so to speak, although there's no chronological order in these, because God is, right? But that's an important line there, and is founded thereupon. So God's justice is founded upon his mercy. For nothing is due to creatures except for something pre-existing in them or foreknown. Again, if this is due to a creature, it must be due on account of something that precedes. And since we cannot go on to infinity, we must come to something that depends only on the goodness of the divine will, which is the ultimate end. All right, so again, Thomas is saying the very creation of man, the very relationship between God and man is based on mercy, is based on justice, is based on liberality and truth and goodness and all the other things that you could say. This is the last slide here. So in every work of God viewed as its primary source, there appears mercy. Okay, in all that follows, the power of mercy remains and works indeed with even greater force, as the influence of the first cause is more intense than the second causes. So I think what he's saying here is the first cause, so to speak, is mercy. Okay, this is what God leads with mercy, and all the others come after, so to speak. For this reason does God, out of abundance of his goodness, bestow upon creatures what is due to them more bountifully than is proportionate to their deserts, since less would suffice for preserving the order of justice than what the divine goodness confers, because between creature and God goodness there can be no proportion. All right, I think that what he's saying here is that God leads with mercy. Okay, the justice and mercy are intertwined, and there's always justice with mercy, but it seems to be that God is principally a God of mercy. And so what I think happened is that this is high level stuff. Okay, this is pretty much in agreement with what comes later from Jesus's revelations to Faustina and John Paul II canonizing her, and as the first saint of the new millennium, is that it had to be simplified. It had to be spoken, I think, perhaps in language beyond just like Thomistic language, and it had to be personalized, where Jesus is speaking to one nun in Poland, and then she asks her to write a diary, have somebody paint a picture of me. It had to be further explained, because I don't think the general populace, especially the poor sinners, were getting it, were understanding it. But I think, and this will be my final point, that this is a beautiful devotion. This is a beautiful aspect of the church in the last 24 or 25 years. But the seeds of it were already in St. Thomas Aquinas in the first place. But I think Jesus, and by extension John Paul II as Pope, felt like this is something that had to be a little better explained to the average person, because maybe with the 20th century being so challenging, and so many things that we're dealing with right now, an emphasis on God's mercy really had to be further explained and expounded, and maybe there even had to be a picture of Jesus that went along with it, along with a big diary that better explains the seeds of which already existed throughout the history of the church, as were evident in the writings of St. Thomas Aquinas in the Summa Theologica. I hope this helps. God bless you.